Thank you very much for coming. You know, I have been freezing for, I don't know, it seems like 10 days. Rainy, wet, cold, and I thought, oh my goodness, it's so nice to see the sun. I wouldn't come to a lecture. I'd be outside. So I appreciate you. Thank you very much. But before I get started, I want to tell you a little story. Back many years, when I was in high school, I was in a creative writing class. There were just 10 students in the class. We were seated around a square table, all 10 students, and our teacher, very prim and proper, was just starting the class. And the door burst open, and these two young men, students that were always model students, came in there and they were arguing like you wouldn't believe, verbally. And then it broke out into physically fighting. While our little, I don't know, 5'2" teacher, very slim, very proper, she grabbed them by the nape of the neck, so to speak, drug them out the door, and she says, "We're going to the office." Well, the class is sitting there looking at each other. What on earth just happened? Those kids never fight. About that time, she comes back in, and she says, "Take out your pencil and paper and write down everything you saw."
Ooh.
So we did. 10 students. And you know what we had? 10 results. That's exactly what we have with the Dillinger story. People were eyewitnesses. Yes, I saw it. I know what happened. I was there. And another person standing right beside them, "I was there, I saw it." They've got a totally different story. So, what I'm saying is, as I go through this, I have tried very hard to find facts that at least two people can agree upon. If I've got something that's kind of interesting, but I really can't back it up, I'll tell you. But otherwise, I tried. But every book I read, newspaper articles even, it was fascinating. So, let's get started with the 1930s. And we're in the 1930s, downtown Lima. This is what it looked like. But what's happening in the United States? Well, we know we're kind of in the middle of a depression. We know we got a New Deal. Franklin Roosevelt is president, and he's got a lot of promises. He's going to pull us out of that depression. We know the banks have closed, and many, if not most of us, have lost all the money we saved. We do know there is a Reconstruction Finance law that's just been passed, and that's going to get our banks back on track. We know there are 4 million people in the United States out of work. So the time's 1933, and what's happening right here in Lima? Well, we're pretty much in the same boat as the rest of the nation. But maybe not quite as bad. Our refinery is still working. It's operating. The farmers are raising crops and they're having a pretty good yield, but they can't get any money for it. There's no cash currency to come. In 1930, in the census, there were 93 industrial employers listed in Lima and 8,000 employees. By 1934, that was cut in half. In 1933, in Lima, I am sorry to say, we had a very powerful Ku Klux Klan. Crime was rising in Lima, but it was also rising around the world. Labor unions were beginning to form. I have a quote here from Herb Lang. He was a county deputy sheriff. This gives you a little idea of the attitude of the time. Bad habits in those days were drinking, smoking, and lying. Robbing a bank was against the law, but so what? So many people lost savings in banks, and if they got hold of any money, they put it in the backyard in a can. That's the situation that we have. So what's happening in the world at this time? Well, the world is suffering a depression also. We've had an industrial revolution, all kinds of miraculous inventions. Industry is booming. One thing, most people have cars, but now the cars are getting fast and fancy. We've had prohibition. That didn't work. 18th Amendment that repealed it has just been taken away. We finished World War I, survived it. We've had the roaring 20s. Roaring because industry, economy is just exploding. We've got the Thompson machine gun. It was supposed to have been invented for World War I, but it didn't get on the market in time, and so it's on the market now. But it's very, very expensive, and police forces can't afford it, but criminals can. The FBI is in its infancy. J. Edgar Hoover has taken over. He's really working to try and get things on the right track. Law enforcement in general is not as we know it today. It's not organized. It doesn't go across state lines. So what's happening in Lima specifically? In 1933, well, we're getting back on our feet. Westinghouse Small Motors Division is getting ready to open a plant here in 1935. And we've got a new sheriff. Jess Sarber, very popular, is elected sheriff in 1929. Jess was born June 28, 1886 in Delphus, grew up in Elida as a child and eventually moved to Lima, where he was a livery owner when he got old enough. But think about that time. That would have been about 1900, early 1900s. Cars are taking over. Less and less people have horse and buggy. So the livery owner business, that's not a big deal right now. So he decides, well, let's join the competition. He becomes a car salesman. Then the Depression hits. Few people have money to buy cars. And in 1929, he is voted in as sheriff. By 1933, he has just had a landslide victory to get back in office. He's well respected, he's well liked, he's considered a brave individual, a very fair man. Also born in June, this is June 22nd, 1903, was John Dillinger. He was born in Indiana to a middle-class family. His father was a very hard-working grocer. He had a mother and an older sister. I think she was about 10 years older, by the name of Audrey. But his mother, just shortly after this picture here was taken, this is John at about 3. His mother died when he was 3. And it changed the whole dynamics of the family. His older sister tried to help take care of him, but she wasn't in the house that long until she grew up, got married, and moved out. And John's dad just, it's like he fell apart. He was totally dysfunctional. He just did not seem to know what to do with John. There was no consistency in discipline. There was no really care of John. He would totally ignore him, or he would tie him to the wagon wheel behind his grocery because John wouldn't behave. There was just no consistency. So John, in this picture here, is about 8 or 9 years old. He's in school just shortly after that. By the time he is about 6th grade, he's quite a leader. And he's got a group of boys called the Dirty Dozen that follow him around. They play after school, they spend summers together. Their main job is they steal coal from the Pennsylvania Railroad yard. Now this isn't uncommon. That happened a lot. It is depression, you know, and they need to fuel their homes. But he made really good money at it. He also got in a lot of trouble. And I won't go into all the details because the time is short and there's a lot to tell. But John, right adjacent to his father's grocery store, was an abandoned sawmill. And John and friends used to tie boys up that they didn't like on the I don't know what you call it, the rail that goes up to the sawmill, and turn the sawmill on. And he'd shut it off, but not until they were just about a foot in front of the boy. He also was a leader in a gang rape of a little girl at this coal yard. Don't want to go into the details. It's really gory. Nothing was ever done. To be perfectly honest, police force had other things to do. They were spread thin. And here we've got 12 young men that said, well, she was willing, and we've got a little girl that really wasn't quite sure what had happened. And so nothing was ever done, and the police just ignored it. So you can see personality. John is, he's not your model child. Now, if you learn nothing else about John Dillinger, remember this. It's always, always a woman that gets him in trouble. Always. It never fails. Every problem he has, you go back and look and you'll find the woman at the bottom of it. At 16, he decides he wants to take his girl on a date. He's got a problem now. He doesn't have a car. No problem for John. He knows that the Quaker church is having services that night. He goes to the church and he looks for the newest, fastest, prettiest car, and he steals the car, and they go on their date. Well, he does get caught. But as he gets caught, the police have a hold of him by the shoulders on his jacket, and he wriggles out, and he runs away. Well, he knows he can't go back to Indiana, so he decides, I'm going to join the Navy. And you might think, well, that'd be a good thing. That'll give him a little discipline. Not John. He joins the Navy. He does get through basic training, and he's out on ship, and just as soon as they get into harbor, it was at Baltimore, he goes AWOL. He goes back to Indiana, and of course it's a woman. He marries a young girl by the name of Burl Hovis. She's only 16 years old, and this is John about the time he came back. Well, they moved in with Burl's family, and he's trying to support this young family that he's got here, and he's trying to find work. Well, John apparently was an excellent baseball player and loved baseball. So he joined the community baseball team, and in doing that, he became good friends with the umpire, Ed Singleton. Bad move. That was a bad thing. Ed was about 10 years older, and just bad news from the beginning. He had been in trouble with the law. He was an alcoholic. He wasn't above any law. So Ed takes John under his wing, and he says, you know, we could get some money fast. You know the grocer? He takes his receipts once a week to the bank. We could rob him. There's never anyone with him. Plans. Ed is stationed in a car at a certain location, and John has a gun by this time, and John is going to go rob the grocer, and everything proceeds as it should. And John puts the gun in the grocer's back, and you know what? That gun went off by accident. It scared John so bad, he dropped the gun. He had not hurt the grocer at all. He did not get the receipts from the grocer's sales. But John was scared to death, dropped the gun, and he ran to the designated spot to get in the getaway car with Ed Singleton. Only guess what? Ed's not there. No car's there, and John is caught. Now, Ed Singleton is eventually caught too. Ed has a record, but Ed pleads not guilty, and he's given a 2-year sentence. It's John's turn. The prosecuting attorney says, I wouldn't worry about this too much. You don't have any record. You didn't get any money. You didn't hurt the grocer. There's no problem here. You'll probably get a slap on the wrist, and that's it. You don't even need an attorney. So John goes to court. No attorney. His dad doesn't even show up. And he pleads guilty. The court is fresh out of mercy, and they throw him in jail for 20 years. John goes to the Pendleton Reformatory, and he goes through a really dark, bad time. He's very depressed, very resentful. Nothing is ever John's fault anyways, but he really resents all this. And then to top it all off, Beryl, this girl that he married, divorces him. And he goes into even more of a depression. But he began his education in earnest as a bank robber. And these were some of his professors. We've got Russell Clark, we've got Homer Van Meter, we've got Ed Schaus, we've got Harry Copeland. These are just a few of the men that he met, and they took John under their wing. Now, we have to stop here, and we have to think about criminals of the 1930s. Pre-Prohibition, criminals were uneducated, poor people. Usually they were stealing, they were in a life of crime out of necessity. They needed money to support their family, they needed groceries, or for reasons that are at least understandable. But post-Prohibition criminals were intelligent, educated businessmen. For example, Al Capone and his rum runners, when they would go to the racetrack, people would stand up and cheer for him. Bribery was an everyday, common, expected occurrence. So what are the reasons for all of this? Well, public apathy for one thing. We got other things to worry about. We've got to worry about paying the taxes and feeding our family. Faster cars are really a big deal on the market now. Tommy guns, as I told you before, they are very prevalent with criminals. We're getting larger and larger metropolitan areas, and that is a perfect breeding ground for mafia and gangs to get started. Law enforcement, underpaid, undereducated, and undersupplied. In fact, all law enforcement at this time had to supply their own weapons and their own vehicles. There were very few interstate laws. If you committed a crime in Ohio, so long as you cross over into Indiana, that was fine. There was no interstate law. FBI origins, like I said, was in its infancy. So this is the situation. John is thrown in prison with these men and a couple of other men, Harry Pierpont and Charles Makeley. I know it's a bad picture of Harry Pierpont, but I kind of did that on purpose. Harry Pierpont did not like his picture taken. And in fact, this got him in big trouble, because when he would go into prison, they wanted to do a mugshot. He would do everything he could to avoid having his picture taken. These men, Harry Pierpont and Charles Makeley, and those other men that I showed you, they weren't model prisoners, if you know what I mean. Harry was so bad that when he was put in the Pendleton Reformatory, that warden got rid of him as fast as he could, because he did nothing but cause problems. And so they transferred him to the Michigan City prison, which was a maximum security prison, along with all of these other prisoners. John's left in the Pendleton Reformatory all alone. And John does not do all alone well at all. And he goes back into depression. Now remember, I told you he's a good baseball player. He was on the prison's baseball team. And so he decides, I'm going to get transferred to Michigan, the Michigan City prison too, even though it was maximum security, because I'll tell them they've got a better baseball team. And that's exactly what he told them. And they said, okay, you want to go there? You go. And they shipped him out. So here we are with Harry Pierpont, kind of the dean of the college, and I would say Charles Makeley, aka Fat Charles, as the assistant dean. Those other criminals I showed you as the professors, they're all going to teach John how to rob banks. Let's go back to Harry Pierpont. Interesting guy. Mental health people tell me all of these guys would have today a diagnosis of an antisocial personality disorder, which I understand to be a broad umbrella of a lot of different disorders. I just say Harry's crazy. This guy is just plain crazy. As a youth, very intelligent. He did very well in school, well-liked, charismatic, really kind of a born leader. He grew to be 6'2", really a pretty nice kid. But when he was about 19, in 1921, he had a severe head injury. Now we know today that that can change personalities. But his mother, from that time on, never stopped pleading for him and begging for mercy for him. She says, and I think everyone would bear this out, Harry became erratic in behavior. He'd have violent temper fits. He had an obsession with firearms. Just at the drop of a hat, he would start a fight. So his whole personality changed. He actually was in a mental hospital for a few months, and they got rid of him because they couldn't do anything with him. But in 1925, in Pendleton, the warden got rid of him because he wouldn't cooperate with him. He wouldn't have his picture taken. He'd go on hunger strikes. The prison guards would beat him, and that didn't bother Harry any. The other prisoners, though, they held him as king because he could withstand the beatings of the guards better than anybody else. He could go longer on hunger strikes than anybody else. He could survive solitary confinement more than anybody else. So they thought he was king, and John really looked up to him. So Harry takes him under his wing. Now we've got to talk a little bit about Charles Makeley because he is a local boy here. He's born and raised in St. Mary's. It's an interesting story. This is one of these things. I'm not sure if this is true or not. But I did read this in a newspaper article. The Makeley family that is still surviving in St. Mary's says, he is not our family. And this is the way they get it. They say his mother was pregnant by a roustabout from a traveling circus, and their father, Edward, married her and adopted the unborn child, which happened to be Charles. So they don't claim him. I don't know if that's true or not, but I suppose if I was a Makeley, I'd say that too. His profession when he got older, he always listed himself as a salesman. And let me give you an example of that. By the time he's in the 8th grade, he quit school because he's had enough of that. And he almost immediately begins having little brushes with the law. You know, minor things, nothing too big. He ends up moving over to Missouri, businessman. He sells insurance. And one example of all of this is he robs a bank. But he has to hurry and get away because he's supposed to be the keynote speaker at a business meeting that afternoon. And he shows up and gives the speech. It was a casual occurrence, a very casual thing. So you can kind of get an idea of the attitude toward it all. So they think John is going to be released before them, and they're right. In May 1933, John is released from prison. We don't have time to go into it, but between May and July, it is a fascinating story what all John gets into. And it would give you a true picture of the situation of the time. But by July 1933, he has robbed 10 banks in 5 different states under 3 different bank robber gangs. And he has stolen $50 million. Today, 1.2 million. One of those banks, as you know, is the Bluffton Bank in Lima. In August of in Allen County, in August of 1933, he robs the Bluffton Bank. They always wanted small banks in small towns because the police force wasn't very good. There might not even be a police force, and so they could get away. Another example of discrepancies here, I don't know for sure how much they stole from the Bluffton Bank. Both of these examples that I've read here are from the newspapers, but one said 2,100, one said 2,300, so take your pick. Let's say 2,200, we'll go down the middle. No police force, so the Bluffton Bank hires the Pendleton security to find their money and get John back. Now remember, there's always a woman at the bottom of the problem. So where does John go after he robs the Bluffton Bank? He goes to his girlfriend's. This is Mary Longacre. If you're familiar at all with our display downstairs, we have a letter that Mary wrote to John while he was in prison here. I think she was nuts too, because she was already married. And she's telling him, oh, Johnny, I miss you. I just love you so much. I'm going to marry you as soon as I get a divorce. She was crazy too. But the Pendletons knew about her. And they knew John's proclivity to women. And so they watched her apartment, staked it out, found John down there, and the Montgomery County law enforcement arrested John. Well, John freely goes with them. He freely admits, yeah, I robbed the Bluffton Bank, because he wants to be in the Allen County jail. He does not want to be in the Montgomery County jail, because Montgomery County did have a law enforcement. Dayton was a relatively large town at that time, and Lima, we've got a good sheriff, but it's not a very big force. And so he thinks my gang can break me out of the Allen County jail easier than they can in Montgomery County. So he confesses, and by September 28, 1933, John is a guest of the Allen County jail with Mr. and Mrs. Jess Sarber as his hosts. Now we have to begin to look here. I'm not a good photographer, so if you're from Lima at all, you should understand a little bit here. We've got North Street right here. This is Main Street that I cut off. Sorry. Cut that off. This is Cherry Alley. This is the courthouse, still standing. This, of course, isn't. This is the jail in 1933, and this is the sheriff's home. This is where Jess and Lucy Sarber lived, and this is a little porch here. This is the situation in 1933. We have to start with October 11th, 1933. Now, as a docent, we do floor duty, and you meet the most interesting people. Several years ago, I was doing floor duty. An elderly gentleman came in a wheelchair, and his caregivers were pushing him along, and they said all he wants to see is the Dillinger display. And I said, okay. So we get in the elevator, we go downstairs, we go to the Dillinger display, and we begin to look at the artifacts. And then this gentleman begins to tell me his story. Some of you may be familiar with his name. It was Art Brutzer. He was a big manufacturer and industry owner here in Lima. By this time of when I'm talking to him, he is well into his late 90s. I think he was 99 when he died, I'm not sure, but he was in his late 90s when he came. And he begins to tell me this story. Now, my impression was he knew exactly what he was talking about. I don't know, true or not. He says he was in elementary school and he was a little boy, and he and his friends, as soon as school was out, they liked to run up here and hide in these bushes around the porch because they knew John Dillinger was in there. And they knew his friends were going to come and break him out. And they wanted to be on hand to see it. So they'd been doing this for 2 or 3 days, and his mother had been looking for him. And she found him October 11th, 1933. According to him, she grabbed, there's 2 boys there at the time, she grabbed both boys by the ear, drags them down the street, shaking them and scolding them the whole way. This is dangerous, you will not come back here. And they're, today we call it grounded, at home, and he can't get out. And he's just furious because, of course, the next day John Dillinger breaks out of jail, and he misses all the excitement. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's exactly how he remembers it. Also, October 11th, 1933, now I'm just going to call them the gang, all of these guys that broke out of jail, because John did get enough money. That's a fascinating story, how he got him out of jail, but we don't have time again. So, October 11th, 1933, the gang, they're going up and down the streets, they're just checking everything out here. They're going all over. They're looking everything over, because they got to see, how can we get away? What's the lay of the land? You know, casing the joint. That night, they go back to Leipzig, where Harry Pierpont's family is. They have a farm there, and they spend the night. So now let's go to October 12, 1933. 2 of the gang come into town, and they visit a local attorney by the name of Chester Cable. And they tell him that, oh, John's sister is so upset, and she really wants to see John. Could you please prevail upon the sheriff to let the sister in? Well, Chester says, I don't know, I'll see what I can do. But I gotta talk to the sheriff first. Well, as these 2 gang members leave, they realize, uh-oh, we might have just tipped them off. We gotta step things up. So, October 12, 1933, in the afternoon, Chester Cable, true to his word, goes to Jess Sarber, and he warns him that there's these 2 guys, I don't know about them, I don't know what the situation is, but they say John's sister wants to come and visit. Well, Jess Sarber takes notice of this. Now, Jess and Lucy always had a church service at the jail every week. And he takes so much notice of it that he decides, I better cancel church. So there's a young girl, she's only 14. She plays the organ for church. Her name's Cora Jones. She and her mother are due to come that night, and Jess calls them and says, I think you better not come. We're going to cancel church. I think security's too dangerous. So she didn't come. And then we have to get to that evening. We're on October 12th, 1933. We're about 6:20 in the evening. Now, at that time, Mrs. Sarber was like the matron for the female prisoners, but she was also the chef. And she had just served them a delicious meal, pork chops, mashed potatoes and gravy, and to all accounts, she was an excellent cook. Prisoners never complained, and so everyone is relaxed. And the prisoners are in the common room. In fact, they're playing pinochle. And Jess and Lucy Sarber are in the sheriff's office, reading the paper, working the crossword puzzle. They're visiting with this man, Wilbur Sharp, who is a friend of their son, Don, who is also a deputy. And, but he's not there as a deputy, he's just there visiting, and they're enjoying a good time. Let's go back here again. See where that arrow is up here? Just about at that entrance right there. Pierpont, Harry Pierpont, Charles Makeley, and Russell Clark enter the jail. They come up to Jess Sarber, and they say, "We are officials from Indiana. We would like to interview John Dillinger." Now this is the testimony of Wilbur Sharp. He says, Jess stood up, and Jess says, as he's reaching back, Wilbur Sharp assumed for his weapon, "I'd like to see your credentials." And Harry Pierpont immediately shoots Jess Sarber twice in the abdomen. So Jess is laying on the ground, semi-conscious, bleeding out. They're wanting the keys. Where's the keys? Where are the keys? Wilbur Sharp says, "I don't know where the keys are." So Charles Makeley begins to pistol whip Jess Sarber. "Where are the keys? Come on, where are the keys?" Lucy finally says, "Just quit beating, Dad. I'll get the keys." And so she gets the keys for them. I get started on the story and I lose where I am. So then they throw, let's go to the common room. In the common room, we have John and a man by the name of Art Miller, who is in trouble for speakeasies here in town, and some other prisoners. They're playing pinochle. And they hear all this commotion, and the prisoners say, "John, it sounds like a breakout." They're all expecting it. John, his nickname is Jackrabbit. He had this famous thing that they would all know it was John Dillinger because he would leap over countertops. And he leaped over the table where they were playing cards. He grabbed his jacket, and he says, "Sounds like a breakout." And he runs out and he gets out of jail. Now, let's go back. Also, at about 6:30, on Main Street here, we have Mr. and Mrs. Faye Carter. They're personal friends with the Sarbers. Socially, they go out to eat a lot. They socialize. But the Carters have decided they're going to go out to eat for supper that night, and they're walking along Main Street this way. And we have two lookouts here. We have Ed Schaus on this block, and we have Harry Copeland on this block. As the Carters are walking, they hear two bangs, like, my goodness, it sounds like gunshot. And Mr. Carter says to his wife, "I think I'll just step over and make sure Jess and Lucy are okay." So he starts walking right along here, and Ed casually comes up to him, and he says, "Did you hear that? That sounds like gunshots. I'm going to go see what it is. I'll let you know." So Ed calmly walks back, goes up here, walks into the office of the jail. He immediately sees what's going on, calmly, casually walks back out, and he goes up to Mr. Carter and he's laughing and he says, "Oh, they were moving two file cabinets and two of the drawers fell out." Oh, they have a good laugh. The Carters go on to supper, never knowing what happened until later that evening. Then we get to, where's my button? About 6:35, 6:40, October 12th, 1933. We have a yellow convertible sitting right about here. There's a young man by the name of Lowell Cheney, 15 years old. He's leaning over the convertible, talking to them. They're making some social plans. And the convertible pulls off this way, and as they pull off, Lowell hears some glass breaking somewhere on Cherry Alley. And so he decides to investigate. He runs across the road, and as he's crossing the lawn right here, 4 men are running out this way. The car's actually down here. 4 men are running out this way, and Lowell says, "Hey, what's going on in there?" They don't answer him. Lowell continues on, and as he gets back here by the jail, Wilbur Sharp yells out the window and says, "The sheriff has been shot. Run around into the office and call for help," which is exactly what he did. He comes back around here and he enters the office. I don't know this, I'm just assuming, but I believe Lowell Chaney is the person that called for help. Everything else that I read and hear, that's the only logical person. So, could be wrong, but I think he's the one that calls for help. Jess and Lucy and Wilbur, now remember, are locked in that jail. Can you imagine, poor Lucy, she's seeing her husband laying on the ground, bleeding out, probably dying, and she can't get out to help. When Lowell comes in, he tries to find the keys. They can't find keys anywhere. I don't know if they ever did find the keys. They end up having to call some railroad workers in with a cutting torch to cut them out of jail. Jess, as we all know, died in about 90 minutes at the hospital. But Dillinger and his gang are long gone. About this time, the phone call comes in. I believe it's Lowell Chaney, and the young man by the name of Kermit Westbay is taking calls. He's only been on the police force just a few months. So he's taking calls that night, and he's visiting with a friend who happens to be a fireman. And the fireman used to be a policeman. I guess the fireman paid better, I don't know what. But as the phone call comes in, Kermit decides, I need to get over there. So this fireman says, I'll take the calls for you. So, as an aside, Kermit used to be our police chief from 1943 to 1954. He says, this is the beginning of the term, the Dillinger Gang. And I want to give you just a little background. There was a man in Indiana by the name of Matthew Leach. This man was very educated. He was, I would say, a precursor to our criminal psychologists, because he studied the psychology of all of these guys. He happened to know that Harry Pierpont was the leader of this gang. And so he decides, I'm going to cause some problems in this gang. I'll call it the Dillinger Gang. Then there's going to be jealousy, it's going to break it all apart, and the gang will dissolve. Harry Pierpont did not want any attention. He avoided any publicity. John wanted all the attention he could get. In fact, John even kept a scrapbook of all of the newspaper articles he could gather of all of his exploits. So from here on, they're called the Dillinger Gang. Now, remember Herb Lang? I gave you that quote about how robbing a bank, so what, that's not a big deal. He is a young deputy sheriff at this time, personal friend of Don Sarber's, and he used to take care of John when John was in prison. He said he was a model citizen. Very cooperative, very polite, never gave them any problems. That was kind of John's modus operandi. So now, the gang has escaped. Now what's going to happen? What's the life of the gang after Lima? The car, which one article said it was a Hudson, was found in a barn that the Pierpont family owned, covered with hay. The Lima Police Department found that. But of course the men are all gone. Where did they go? Girlfriends. I'm telling you, it's always a girlfriend. They all had girlfriends that had arranged food, new clothing. They had medical supplies if necessary. They had transportation. They went to Hamilton, Ohio, where all of their girlfriends were waiting for them. And they get in Hamilton, and they regroup, and they move to Chicago. Now, in Chicago, they are successful businessmen. They dress in the best clothes. They have the best apartments, the fastest, newest cars. Their women are dressed to perfection. And they hold business meetings. Every day they have a business meeting in Harry Pierpont's apartment. They plan their next bank robbery and how they're going to get away. They make all the arrangements. They don't rob banks in Chicago. They rob the small towns all around that are a fast getaway for them. They also rob police arsenals, and that was where John killed his first man, was a police arsenal in Indiana, where he killed a police officer. Well, they had a very successful time. They had a lot of money. They decided it's time for a vacation. Things are getting a little hot. So they go to Florida, and then they eventually go to Arizona. Another fascinating story, but no time to tell you, about the arrest in Arizona. They are all arrested, even though they're all in different hotels and apartments. They're all arrested within 6 hours of each other, not a gunshot fired. They're put in jail there, and then the fighting starts. Every state where they've robbed a bank, and it's like 7 or 8 states, each state wants that person in their state to prosecute. Well, John goes back to Indiana, Crown Point, Indiana, because that's where he has killed a police officer. Of course, we know Harry Pierpont, Charles Makeley, Russell Clark, they come to Lima because that's where they killed a police officer. It's really interesting to read how that all comes about, but no time. So, we get into the courtroom. They say Lima was like a big circus at this time. National Guard was stationed all over the roofs of the buildings. There were deputy sheriffs all through this courtroom here with Tommy guns pointed right at the officers until the judge told them they couldn't do that. Or right at the criminals, and then the judge says, you got to back off a little. Just a quick aside here is this woman. I find her very interesting. I'd like to know more about her. This is Jessie Levy. She was the defender. She was Makeley and Pierpont and Clark's attorney. She was from Indiana, one of the first female attorneys in Indiana, and eventually became, for what I understand, the first female in Indiana to be appointed to a judgeship. Very intelligent woman. She had a big job. She is defending Pierpont and Makeley and Clark. So Pierpont's up first. They tried to say that he was with his mother in Leipzig. And his mother, it's a mother thing, I guess. She lied for him. She tried to defend him, and she said, oh yeah, he was with me. And besides, and she went into this whole thing about personality change and so forth. Now, let me go back and explain just a little bit about Harry Pierpont's leadership styles. When Harry Pierpont was the boss in Chicago, he put up with no nonsense. There was no drinking. There was no drug use. You did what Harry said, and you did it when he said to do it. And if you didn't, out. Well, apparently, Ed Schaus, if you remember the young man that casually went up to talk to the Carters, well, Ed, I don't know what he did. He did something, and he was thrown out of the gang. As he's thrown out of the gang, he must have held some bitterness because he testified against Harry. And they say that was one of the things that pushed the jury over. The prosecutor at the time is a man by the name of Ernest Botkin, and he thought he was going to use Harry's weak point, which was his pride. Botkins, in testimony, says to Harry, You've robbed $300,000 of the public's money. In today's money, that's $5.74 million. Pierpont's answer, I wish I had, but if I did, I'm not like some bank robbers. I didn't get myself elected president of the bank first. And that was the attitude of many people. So the jury goes to deliberate, 55 minutes, they come back, guilty, no leniency. Makeley's trial comes up next. This is Makeley over here with Jesse. Now for some reason, I don't know what, he must not have had any resentment against him, Ed Schaus refused to testify against Charles Makeley. But the verdict was the same. Guilty, no leniency. The judge, Judge Everett, his descendants have been attorneys here in Lima for a long time, but Judge Everett then sentenced both Makeley and Pierpont to the electric chair. Russell Clark is sentenced to life in prison, and he did spend life in prison until the 1960s. He was released on, I think you call it benevolent leave or compassionate leave. He was dying of cancer, and once he was released, he only lived two weeks. But Harry Pierpont and Charles Makeley are in prison. They're waiting on the electric chair. Now John, if you remember, he is in prison in Crown Point, Indiana. This is an interesting story. No time. This is the wooden gun thing. I'm sure you've all heard of the wooden gun. Some people say, oh, no, that didn't happen. I'm just not so sure. From everything I have read, it sounds very likely to me, but I don't know. John breaks out that the sheriff there, who happened to be a female, said her jail was, you couldn't break out of her jail. Well, it didn't take John much time. He broke out and he actually stole her car. When he broke out, he continued to rob banks. Let me give you just a couple of human interest stories here. John is robbing a bank. There's a farmer in line to do his banking. The farmer's got some cash in hand, and John says, is that money yours or is that money the bank's? And the guy says, no, that's my money. He said, okay, you can go. You can keep your money. I only want the bank's money. Another instance was a state bank in Indiana. It was just outside of Indianapolis. The bank manager is at work. He's sitting at his desk, his head's down, working on his papers, and he hears somebody say, this is a stick-up. And he starts to laugh, because this is the big joke in banks, because so many bank robberies. But he looks up, and there's John on the top of a 7-foot barricade, sitting up there with his legs crossed and a Tommy gun resting across his lap with a smirk on his face. And he realizes this isn't a joke, this is a stick-up. And this one tops it all. You know, movies were the big thing in the 1930s. They were really coming of age, and they were fascinated with this motion picture industry. And so, really, a brilliant idea. The gang decides, we're going to spread the rumor in this little town that we're filming a bank robbery. But we'll really rob the bank. And that's exactly what they did. And the whole town turns out, because they're so excited to be part of this movie. And they're all surrounded, and they're all watching, and the bank is robbed, and they never realize it until after the fact. A woman, we have to go to another woman. This is Billy Frechette. Evelyn, Billy Frechette. Apparently John really thought a lot of her. He says he was married to her, but I can find no marriage certificate, so I'm not sure about that. But John knows Harry and Charles are in jail, and they're probably waiting on him to break them out, and he's going to do everything he can to break them out. And so he goes on robbing banks. Some of those examples I just told you about. He gathers some money and he's going to bring it back to Harry's family. But on the way, he decides it's time for a little family reunion and I'd like Billy to meet my dad. And so they go to Mooresville, Indiana, where John's family lives. They all know John is public enemy #1 now. They all turn out to celebrate John Dillinger. And John's dad is so proud of him, and the town is so proud of him, and they just have a wonderful time, spend a whole weekend there, and no one ever contacts the FBI. In fact, this is how charismatic John could be. By the time he left, all of his friends, all of his family, everyone from the town, including the Attorney General for the state, writes a letter to the governor and says, you need to pardon John Dillinger. He's really turned over a new leaf and he's a really good guy. Well, we know different. But a woman gets John in trouble after he turns that money over to the Pierpont family. Billy, she liked to drink. Billy got in trouble in a tavern. And I don't know what kind of trouble, but it was bad enough. She was thrown in jail. And John's, he's in depression because he can't do without a woman. Impossible. And so he gets another girlfriend in a big order. He's back in Chicago now. This is Polly. This is John's girlfriend. Now, to her credit, she does not know it's John Dillinger. He's got his name changed, and he tells her that he works on the stock exchange. This is Polly. This is Polly's friend, Anna. You probably know the story of Anna Sage. We won't go into it, but she makes a deal with the FBI. She's about to be deported, and she doesn't want to be deported. She makes a deal with the FBI, and she says, we're going to be at the Biograph Theater. We'll be getting out of the theater about 10:10 or 10:15. You watch for us. I'll have a red dress on, and you'll know that that's John Dillinger. You got to read the story. It's like Keystone Cops. But they do find John Dillinger as he's coming out. John always had kind of a sixth sense. And he seemed to know, I think somebody's after me. And he took off running down the street, went down an alley. The FBI did shoot him, and they did kill him. Here a few years ago, the rumor was, no, he's not dead. Yes, yes, yes. He is dead. This is in July 22nd of 1934. So, John is dead. But remember, Harry Pierpont and Charles Makeley and Russell Clark, they're in prison expecting John to break them out. Well, after John's death, they realized we got to take care of this situation ourselves. And so Harry Pierpont and Charles Makeley make a run for it, using a playbook of John's. They carve wooden guns, but they use soap. They get out. But as they get out, they are shot. Charles Makeley is killed instantly. Harry Pierpont is shot and severely wounded. So bad that he's in the infirmary for 30 days. Once they get him better, they put him in prison and they execute him then. This is September 1934 when they tried to break out. There is so much more to the story, but we are out of time. But I want to just give you something to think about. Is this just a fun, interesting story to think about? Or is there more to it? Is there some reason we should be studying this situation and apply it to today? Some of you that know me, my fellow docents, know I always like to relate what's happening then and what's happening today. Is there any kind of a connection? Can we learn anything from it? Because I'm a firm believer we all can learn from history. There is so much more. I've got a couple of books here if you're interested to see some maps and so forth, and I will attempt to answer any questions if I can. Thank you very much.